Welcome to Ordo Militaris Radio TV. My name is Brother Alexis Paniolo, and today I'm interviewing A.J. Bauman on Hugh Capet, the Capetian Dynasty, the Bourbon Dynasty, a monarchy, the divine right of kings, and all these wonderful, interesting topics you almost never hear about. Welcome, A.J., to
Thank you for having me on.
I see you're wearing your Capetian blue today. Why is that?
Because of the topic.
And I read somewhere some years ago that almost 80% of everyone in Western Europe can trace their ancestry back to Charlemagne, but most people can't because they don't have the records. But I understand that you personally can trace your ancestry back to Hugh Capet.
Yes.
And what kind of relation is he to you?
He is my 45th great-grandfather. That means 45 generations from me. He is my great-grandfather.
And you trace your lineage through Carloman, was he a younger brother or the brother of Charlemagne? Is that how your lineage goes to Capet?
Yeah.
Okay. So just for clarification, I don't think I'm any relation to Charlemagne. I'm descendant of people of entirely different part of Europe. So, but I'm honored to be able to interview a descendant of Hugh Capet, who a person who's rather poorly known in the West today, but whose personal actions of having children, at least, and what he did politically, has shaped Western Europe and profoundly defended the Catholic faith and the cause of Christ in the entire world for more than 1,000 years. So we're talking about one of the great men of history here. He wasn't a saint, but he certainly was in the key place at the key time to have the greatest effect. And from his loins, as we can say, came hundreds of kings, princes, and his descendants still rule over kingdoms today. For example, the King of Spain is a Bourbon, and he's a descendant of Hugh Capet. And many saints in that family too. So it's a Catholic dynasty. So Hugh Capet. So tell me, in what century did Hugh live, and what do we know about his personal origins?
Let's see here. He was about the middle of the 10th century. He was born about 996, 24th of October. The second son of Hugh the Great, and the mom is Hedwig, sister of Otto the Great, the Holy Roman Emperor.
Okay, so he was born into a noble family. He wasn't just a commoner. And what kind of titles or offices did he have as a young man?
Let's see. When he was about 10 years old, he inherited from his father the Countship of Paris and the Duchy of France.
So those are the key fiefs of the Kingdom of the Franks, as it was called back then. We call it France today, but back then it was called the Kingdom of the Franks because they were the Germanic people who had conquered France after the fall of the Roman Empire. And so how did he come to power? I mean, those are only small fiefs. How did he come to be, I think he became King of France, didn't he?
Yes. When Louis V died, with the assistance of Aldebaran, Archbishop of Reims, and Gerbert, brought about the election of Hugh. The electoral assembly of Senlis listened to the discourse of Aldebaran. "Crown the Duke," he said. "He is most illustrious by his exploits, his nobility, his forces. The throne is not acquired by hereditary right, No one should be raised to it unless distinguished not only for nobility of birth, but for the goodness of his soul. An unanimous vote ratified this discourse, and Hugh Capet was crowned at Noyon, July 3rd, 987, and thus was crowned King of France.
So when Hugh becomes king, he founds the Capetian dynasty named after him. Is that the case?
Mm-hmm.
And who was this Louis VII? Was he the last Merovingian king of France?
Yes, I believe so.
Mm-hmm. Most people don't know that the Merovingians were the ancient Frankish royal family. And so, as we see here, something that most people don't know is that when dynasties became extinct in the Middle Ages, the Catholic notion was that the new one should be elected. And that was a very peaceful transfer of power rather than having a revolution. That wasn't always the case, but it was a good tradition in the Frankish and German tribes. And here we have a wonderful case of how Bishop Aldebaran intervenes and convinces the nobles to elect the next king of France and not descend into a war. So we see already that Hugh played a decisive role in peaceful transfer of power, which is the best thing for people. And that the people themselves did a wonderful thing and elected an honest Catholic man and not just some money grabbing, crook. So, so from Hugh Capet, how many dynasties, famous people descend?
Let's see here. We have the saintly King Louis IX, and it's about 1,000-year dynasty. So, and it somewhat ended when King Louis XVI, Queen Marie Antoinette, and a little king, King Louis XVII, was killed in the French Revolution, which people know about the King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, but they know the lies of the Masons who put out there about the Queen and have forgotten about the little king.
Yeah, that the final heir of the Bourbon, in the direct line, the Bourbon house in France, that poor little king, what was his name? Louis
XVII.
Louis the 17th. They just brutally tortured him. What are some of the things they did that you won't read in history books? Say it in all its graphic reality, because people need to know how evil the French Revolution was.
They put him in so tiny of a cage he could not move. If he did, his joints were just twisted. They beat him. They gave him awful food, moldy water. They beat him. I believe they extinguished their whatever cigarettes or cigars he smoked at the time on him. He was just maligned, mistreated, tortured
Was he
to death.
starved to death?
Yes, at the end.
Did they throw prostitutes on him to try to rape him?
Yes, male and female.
Male and female. And how old was he at the time?
I think 12.
So they were involved in child rape on top of it. That's complete barbarous. And where is he buried? Just so that people know, where is this? Was it Louis the 17th? Is that his name?
From the autobiography I found online, it was just a common private grave. They didn't want him to be found.
And years later, after the French Revolution was undone, did they dig up the grave and bury him in an honorable way?
I do not know.
And all that hate was the hate of the Catholic dynasty of the Capetians, which had promoted the Catholic faith for nearly 1,000 years. So it shows you that when people say, oh, we should be friends with people of the left, well, the people of the left have a track record of murdering Catholics. So you're pretty naive if you're going to be their friends, because their ideology is so deadly. But the Capetian dynasty didn't rule only over France, didn't it? What are some other kingdoms they ruled?
Let's see here. They had influence over Germany. And the wife he chose was Adele of Aquitaine, so that would be the wife of King Henry II of England's relative. So pretty much England, Ireland, all those, plus the Aquitaine of France. Wherever the English monarchy had reached, it was pretty much through the Capetian line.
And that's how you're related to Hugh Capet. It's through King John, right? The brother of Richard the Lionheart.
Yep.
The Bourbons inherited the thrones of Spain, the thrones of the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, and a whole bunch of other little possessions all over the place. And so they had influence in almost all of Western Europe. Not to mention Louis IX. You mentioned King Louis IX, who led the 7th and the 8th Crusades, which, though militarily weren't very successful, nevertheless inspired countless generations of Catholics. I was amazed to find out that the French general who assisted the revolutionaries in the United States, Lafayette, was actually a descendant of a Crusader knight who fought, I think, with Louis IX. So it shows you how profoundly efficacious the Capetian dynasty was, inspiring even other noblemen for constant generations to work for the rights and liberty of others. A lot of topics are involved in kingship. People don't know much what it is because everyone talks about democracy and republics today.
Yeah. Let's see. So, what is a monarchy?
Yeah, monarchies get a bad name too because we're living in the post-Masonic era. Okay, so the Masonic Lodge wants to destroy monarchies because they want to destroy order and they want to destroy anything reference to God. But monarchy, as from the Greek, means the rule of one. As a term, a political term, it means where the supreme power in a state is held by a single individual who rules in his own name as king or queen in some cases, and who inherits that office by the fact that he is the firstborn or eldest born son of the previous monarch. And it's a natural institution. Almost every land and culture and people have at some point in civilized societies have come to a point where the wealthiest family has acquired such prominence in society that they are given the power to rule everything, because basically if one family owns most of everything, their economic management of their own possession is pretty much equal to the management of the whole society, or the defense of their property rights and businesses affects the defense of everyone's. So it's just a natural consequence of the family growing into an economic and political unit and becoming the supreme one in a state. so it's a natural institution, and we see monarchs throughout history. They're very prominent. I mean, King David was a monarch, the heirs of Christ. Christ is called the King of David because he holds up monarchy from his lineage as this descent from King David. And countless others, like Charlemagne was a monarch, and King George, against whom the American revolutionaries fought, was a monarch. But so monarchy is it's actually one of the most peaceful transfers of power, because if everyone knows that the eldest son or the elder son of the king is going to be the next king, then there's no plotting about who will be king and the transfer of power or things like that. And people know that their loyalty is to the royal family, and it's a stable form of government. It really, there's no kind of political agitation going on in a monarchical state, because everyone accepts that that's the way things are. Is that the best form of government? Aristotle says that monarchy is the best form of government, because a monarch tends to act in not only his own interest, but that of his people, because if he attacked his own subjects, he would weaken himself. And so monarchy is a form of political institution that is inherently just and honest. Not saying all monarchs are, okay, but inherently it works that way, because it's the defense of the realm becomes the defense of the king and the defense of the royal family, and it all works together towards that way. And it unites everyone's loyalties in a common and simply understood fashion. So that's what monarchy is. And monarchs, I think most of the history of Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire was monarchy. Romans never had kings because in the Roman culture, a king was always a tyrant. The Greeks had tyranny, but they didn't really have monarchy. Monarchy is an institution that was really the best and most common in Western Europe: Spain, Portugal, France, Germany, Poland, parts of the Balkans, England, of course, and Scandinavia, because there was a deep culture of the people as a family unit, as a nation, as a tribe. And so a monarchy, as being ruled by a family member of your nation, was considered something very acceptable. Whereas in the Mediterranean cultures of Rome and Greece, that wasn't the case. There was much more movement of people, and so people didn't have a sense that they belonged to a tribe. So they didn't admire so much monarchies.
It seems like every certain time of the month, not sure, it just depends. It just seems like sometime during one of the months, a flock of people come out. We're Bourbons! We support the Bourbons! What is that all about?
Well, after the fall of the French monarchy, and I think after the fall of the Neapolitan monarchy, well, Naples was conquered by Garibaldi and the Kingdom of Piedmont. There are a lot of people who call themselves Bourbonists or Bourbonics. Different depends on the language, meaning they want the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy. Well, the Bourbon monarchy still exists in Spain, so that what they're talking about is France or the kings of Naples, and in a large part, it's nostalgia. In part, it's a desire to return to a form of politics that is not French revolutionary, not based on Masonic concepts of power and governance. In part, it's I want to distinguish myself and find some identity in my past, or identify with, because a lot of people think that they somehow are royal because they fly a royal flag or something like that. That is not a royal flag. That is a flag of Lepanto. I just wanted to point out that. So I could see you'd be I could see that you, AJ, would be a Bourbonist because they're your relatives, maybe. But someone who's not from France and not from Naples and has no lineage with the French family, why they would be a Bourbonist, I don't know. I guess they're just trying to get an identity on social media or something like that. But as far as I understand, the Bourbonists in France aren't actually trying to restore the monarchy, and they have almost no support. I don't know if they even have a political party. It's more like a nostalgia thing, going to reunions of the royal families and chit-chatting with them and saying, oh, I met a Bourbon, I met Henri of Bourbon or something like that. So That's what the Bourbonist movement is. And I hope I don't offend any of them, because maybe they have higher ideals that are more influential than I understand them to be.
Yeah. To keep on the topic of the House of Bourbon, it's kind of interesting. Most royal houses only accept male heirs from the father line, but the House of Bourbon was married into the House of Capet by my great uncle, Robert, Count of Clermont, married the heiress Beatrice Bourbon. And then that's how the house began.
So it's Beatrice was Capetian.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's why they follow that rule, because if they didn't have that rule, they'd have no claim to the monarchy. So there, as in many cases in the histories of kingdoms, the royal family dies out in the male line, and they only have daughters, and someone marries the daughter and then continues it on. I don't know if that was always true, that the Bourbons trace lineage in the female line, but for example, in Spain, if you may have heard of the Carlists, there were 3 civil wars in Spain in the 19th century because the Bourbon family, which had ruled Spain for like 2 centuries, died out in the direct male line, and there was only a daughter and an uncle. So the brother of the previous king, I'd say the uncle of the previous king, and a daughter. And the daughter claimed the throne, and the Carlists said, no, you can't inherit the throne, because in Spain, only men can inherit the throne, and you cannot go by the Bourbon rules of the dynasty in France. And that started the war. And actually, from a point of view of law, I understand it as much as I do understand it. The Carlists were right, and the woman could not inherit the throne. And so the actual heir of the throne of Spain now lives in southern Italy, I think. And the current Bourbons of Spain are not true Bourbons. They're usurpers. Ever since that decision, she allied herself, and her house allied herself with the radicals, the leftists, and they've destroyed the Kingdom of Spain, which is now on the verge of becoming a communist state. Franco tried to oppose them, but once Franco died and restored the kingdom, the Bourbon king, he brought the leftists all back in, and they started all their antics over. So the current Bourbon family in Spain is really a fake. They're not true Bourbons, because they're not faithful to the faith. They're not faithful even to their own people. They're out to bring in foreigners to destroy their own people. And that was never the character of the Bourbon dynasty and the Capetians. They were always loyal to their own people and always loyal to the church.
In the book Catholic Republic by Tim Gordon, in some of the pages he writes that a republic is a better form of government than a monarchy, due to how we can remove leaders who become tyrants. But it's not that easy to do when a bad king is on the throne and becomes a tyrant. So is a republic better than a monarchy?
Aristotle says it is not, and I agree with Aristotle, speaking in principles, because any man can be corrupt. Okay, so look at the destruction done to America under Barack Obama with, I don't know, what was it, $8 trillion robbed from the Treasury and just disappeared to all his friends. So I don't think there's been any corrupt monarch that's ever been that unjust, because $7 trillion is far more wealth than most kingdoms for thousands of years had. So I don't think his argument really holds up. But the monarchs in Catholic nations were relatively honest men, because when they were children, the family entrusted their education to the church, and learned and pious monks and priests taught the future monarch to be honest and just, and how it's important to be just, to maintain your authority, and how the love of your own people is honest. Whereas in republics, as soon as you have a concept of democracy, love of your own people becomes questionable because, well, if you love just the natives, then you don't love the immigrants, and then you're being prejudiced. And then, the problem with republics, it opens the door to communist infiltration, Marxist infiltration, Masonic infiltration, breakdown of morals, satanic infiltration, because there's no way to defend morals generation after generation in a republic, because any kind of law could be passed. There's no limitation on what any kind of a law could be passed. And they would never support a thing, because then it would have to be like they'd say it's a theocracy. It's not democracy. So the monarch is a Catholic monarch is necessary to preserve a Catholic state, because in his person, by his coronation and by his descent, he ties the state to the past, to the faith, and to the church, and makes it impossible to start introducing, if he's a good monarch, all these crazy ideas. So democracy in itself, even Aristotle says, democracy is the worst form of government, and it always leads to tyranny, where the majority persecute the minority in the name of liberty. And so I would disagree with Jim Gordon on that. And Masons, the sign of Masonic thought is to oppose monarchy and to want to overthrow monarchy. Nowadays, if we talk about Catholic monarchy, it's kind of nostalgia, because there's no one Catholic family in any nation who is so wealthy to dominate the economy and have any kind of ties to the history of the nation anymore. In most nations, the Catholic noble houses in England, for example, have been exterminated. In France, there's still the Bourbons, but the Bourbon families don't have men that are really national leader quality, and I don't even think they train their sons to be that. They've kind of given up on it. Even the Habsburgs, that's the same way. It would be great, but we're no longer in that kind of society where one family has that kind of influence. Although constitutional monarchy is possible, to elect someone and be funding for life. In a Catholic state, that's perfectly fine. You'd have to elect a good Catholic man, and the church is so infiltrated now, having good formation programs is hard to come by. So a lot has to be done to restore society before you could reestablish a Catholic monarchy, unless you just have an extraordinary man gifted by God, that by his grace and his virtues convinces everyone that not only he is trustworthy, but his children will be trustworthy, and so on. But that's possible. By God's grace, there are some prophecies about the restoration of Catholic monarchy. I'm not so up on that. You'd have to ask an expert on it. But Christ is our king, and so obviously, as Catholics, we should admire monarchy. I mean, if you're more suspicious of monarchy than democracy, I don't think you know your history, and I don't think you realize what's going on in your own country. So,
yeah, we have those, I guess, show monarchies where they don't really do anything, like the monarchy in England and a few other places. Just show up for special events, and that's that. So what's the difference between a real monarchy and what's going on with the monarchy in England these days?
okay, so the monarchy in England is, it's a theatrical monarchy. It's not real, because when the Calvinists had their revolution in the 16th century England, they wanted to exterminate the monarchy. And when the Restoration comes, the monarchy is no longer the one who rules the country. It's become the Parliament rules the countries. But they need a monarchy to somehow keep up the facade, because Parliament hates Catholic England and does everything it can to destroy the history of Catholic England and to not deny it. For example, some years ago, they found the tomb, the mortal remains of Richard III, who was a Catholic king. They would not allow him to have a Catholic burial. They gave him a burial in the Anglican Church, which is a historical outrage. And it's their Masonic way of just stealing history and changing history. The Freemasons and the left are the biggest liars in history. So the monarchy in England, they went to Germany and they got a Saxon dynasty and they made them their monarch. And they're not English for squat. There's nothing English about them. Of course, the fact that Prince Charles did marry an English noblewoman and so the heirs of the throne have some English blood in them, but they were particularly trained to hate Catholics and not imitate the Catholic religion of their mother's grandmother. So that's not a monarchy. That's just like an expense of the state to keep up appearances. Real monarchies today would exist in Liechtenstein, which has a prince, a Grand Duke that governs. And though there is a parliament and he's conceded some power to him, he's still the supreme ruler of the state. The Prince of Monaco is a monarchy, a true monarch. The monarch in Spain is pretty much a constitutional monarchy, has a little power, but then again, as I said, the Bourbon family in Spain goes along with the left. Yeah. Some nations, I think Denmark has a monarchy, but it's kind of token monarchy. I think there's a real monarch in one of those, in Borneo, I think there's a real monarch, a Muslim monarch. So there are some monarchies around. I think Bhutan is a monarchy. So there are still some true monarchies in the world, but not so much anymore because the complexities of the modern state, or because there's just so much more movement of peoples and people lack an identity. Because the Masons and the French revolutionaries want everyone to forget the past. They don't want you to know your ancestors, your relatives, what land you come from, because they don't want you to stand up and defend anything. They want you to be manipulated and constantly change your identity. Now they want to change your genome with vaccines. They want to change your gender with law definitions. They want to change your religion with the virus mask, telling you what to do in church and when not to go and when to go. So they want to completely change you because they hate the past, because the past is so colored by Catholic faith. So that's a distinction. Maybe, for example, Putin is almost like a monarch in Russia, though he doesn't hold that title. I think if he became a monarch, a czar, a lot of people would accept it in Russia maybe today. But I think people still are fooled by the idea that democracy leads to order when it doesn't. Democracy leads to disorder because it creates a whole theater of politics or one side's attacking another when a nation should be united and not weakened by internal strife. And where a people should rule itself and they shouldn't be ruled by foreigners or people of other ethnic groups who are a tiny minority in their societies but might control the banks or the media and want to control the whole country.
Yeah. We were talking a few weeks ago when I just had a crazy idea of finding a non-owned piece of land, and he's like, if the Bourbon guy was smart, he would do that and just recreate the monarchy of France. I was like, so what are these pieces of land? Could you do that? Restart it?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing to prevent the heir to the Bourbon throne in France of declaring himself King of France. There's nothing. It might be against French law, but it's certainly not against hereditary law or Catholic principles. Now, that might mean he can't live in France anymore, but there's nothing against him doing it. He certainly has the right. See, we have to understand that what the French Revolution did to France in destroying the monarchy was unjust, and therefore it has no effect on law. And that the French government today just perpetuates that revolution because they're a bunch of criminals. And there'll always be a bunch of criminals because they robbed France from the French monarchy and from all the French nobility. Same thing in Italy. The modern Italian Republic is a bunch of criminals because Italy was robbed from the monarchies that it belonged to. And that's true of many other nations. Like in Russia. Russia will always be unjust because they robbed the right of governing Russia from the Romanov family. So those things are unjust. You just can't ignore them and go through history. So, but if the Bourbon heir did such a thing, I'm sure he could find lots of investors to buy an island or a piece of territory anyway, and set up a principality and restore a monarchical form of government. Because the question is whether they really believe in monarchy anymore. And I think one of the problems with the aristocracy of Western Europe, the former Catholic aristocracy, they no longer believe that that's a form of government. So they're just willing to get money and make more money and be part of a modern Masonic kind of state, and not interested in defending the faith anymore. And I think if they hadn't lost that idealism of Catholic monarchy, they probably wouldn't have lost power and wouldn't have lost respect from the people, because since the revolutions have toppled the monarchies, people have been so exploited. There's been so much injustice, and there's no one to defend the rights of the people anymore. The parties don't do it. They're controlled by the globalists and internationalists and the political class, who are absolute devils, completely immoral, absolutely mendacious, and think they have more authority than any Catholic monarch ever claimed to have. No Catholic monarch ever claimed to have the authority to say that sodomy is just as good as heterosexuality, or that you can't kick someone out of your hotel because he's in there raping another man, you know. So it's absolutely ridiculous to respect the modern form of governments, and I don't know why the royal houses really don't take a more proactive stance and want to defend the people, the Catholic people, and their right to have Catholic rulers. St. Thomas says, for Catholic people not to have a Catholic ruler is a sacrilege. And that's totally right, because we're the heirs of the king. We are heirs and kings of the kingdom of heaven. We are the adopted sons of Jesus Christ, who is King of kings and Lord of lords. We have the right to have Catholics rule over us. And so.
Yeah. Now this one goes about the guy Louis Bourbon. What are people so obsessed with about him?
Well, because I think he's the leading heir of the House of Bourbon in France, and so they want to gather around him and do something. I don't know if that's to any purpose. I think there might be a royalist party in France, but you know, if you want to promote the restoration of the Bourbon dynasty, going to parties and meetings and putting up posters and stickers and saying I'm a Bourbonist is not going to achieve it. What's going to achieve it is you go into the part of town that's poor and people are unemployed. You help them in their poverty. You give them jobs. You defend the little guy, the little Catholic guy who's being persecuted. If he's arrested because he says something Catholic and the modern French revolutionary government wants to persecute him for it, you go there and you pay his legal fees. You defend him. You advocate for him. And if necessary, you break him out of prison. You storm the court when they try to take him in and try him. That way you'll win the respect of the people, and that way you would win the restoration of the monarchy. So, you know, the theatrical monarchism is completely useless, and it's just a waste of time. And I don't know who they're fooling with it. Real monarchy, like Hugh of Capet and his ancestors, were about defending the people for the sake of God and for the sake of their own rights, in their liberties and in their peace, in their work and in their prosperity. It wasn't about, you know, wearing fancy clothing and marching down the street. They were never that kind of completely whacked out, partial reality kind of people. They were people that dealt with the whole reality and really loved their people.
Yeah. I was trying to see if I could find enough material to do a book on him, and it's pretty scarce out there. Did find out I guess, what we call a palace or a castle wasn't really much. It was just a tiny little villa in the middle of Paris, and just that's where he was, and held court and went out and helped the people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they didn't. It was only with the concept of absolutionism that they start building huge palaces like Versailles. And before that, the kings lived rather humbly and spent their time actually visiting other noblemen and staying in their castles and things. And that was one of the duties, little duties. When your lord came and visited you, you put him up for a few days or a week while he was in the region. During which time you also got maybe some legal favors and grants and charters at the same time. So yeah, they weren't about They weren't absolutely obsessed with wealth in the form of money or even form of land. They had a more organic view of reality and society. Well, of course, medieval society wasn't as corrupt as modern society. So they were Catholics, and so they had the grace of God to keep themselves sane and to balance everything together. They understood what sin was. There are many examples in the Middle Ages where kings admitted their sins in public. You will never see a president of any republic admit that he committed a sin. Never, ever. They don't even admit that there's right and wrong, let alone that there's sin. And so consequently, the modern democracies, there's no salvation for them. Whereas the Catholic monarchy, there was always a balance and check, because there was acknowledgement that there is a sin and that king can't say a thing is or isn't a sin. Look what happened to England, because Henry VIII wouldn't admit that he was involved in adultery and that divorce was wrong. He destroyed England. He caused hundreds of thousands of people to be murdered for their faith. And England today is an absolute joke compared to what it was in the time before Henry VIII. It's an absolute joke. It's being overrun by foreigners. Its government's completely infested with spies from other nations. And to say you're British is considered a crime. I mean, you're not outlawing British, the language. I mean, London now, you hear Arabic being spoken. So it's a complete, absolute failure. Without a Catholic monarchy, a nation won't survive. It won't. Its national identity will be destroyed, because there's no other principle for national identity other than a Catholic Christian monarchy, where the heaven and earth and the people of the nation are united in harmony and peace, and in self-respect.
Mm. Let's see. Anything else you would like to touch on?
Yeah, I think we need to talk about absolutism. So the concept of the absolute monarchy is probably what made monarchy so detestable. It was an idea that, according to some scholars, it comes out of Calvin, and the idea that all power in the state should be in the king. Okay, first of all, it's not the medieval concept. Okay, the medieval concept was the king had limited authority. He had to rule with the consent of the barons and the princes. And he didn't have authority over everything. He didn't have authority over the church. He didn't have authority over the guilds. He didn't have authority over cities, or a lot of cities who had free charters. He wasn't the source of right, or of right and wrong, or of religion. So with Henry VIII, we have the first move towards absolutionism, because he claims to have authority over the church. But with some of the later kings of France, the Sun King, Louis XIV, they claim that he had all authority in the state. Well, one man can't make all the decisions. Okay, there has to be some subordinated. You have to allow all sectors of society in a certain way to govern themselves. The supreme authority in the state, the monarchy, is only there to intervene when necessary. So absolutism, for example, absolutism in Austria led the Austrian emperors to insist with the Pope that they name the bishops and not the Pope. And the same thing in Naples, the absolutionism of the king of Naples, he insisted he could name the bishops. And so they lost the favor of God, and they lost the favor of the people, because they wanted everything for themselves in power. And that was not the medieval concept. That wasn't the Catholic concept. It's kind of like an exaggerated version of the medieval concept, which was the divine right of kings, in the sense of God willed from eternity that king should reign, and that God wills to protect a monarch in his authority, and that the people do the will of God in obeying their Catholic monarch. But that doesn't mean he should have all authority. Only God has all authority. And even as a human being, he can't make all decisions. He doesn't have all expertise. And he has to be aware that among his courtiers, there's a lot of people that want to tell him lies to get him to do something unjust. Whereas if every part of the society has its own authority to self-govern in a certain sense, then no one goes to the court of the king to try to create injustice in the provinces, because they have their right to rule and the king can't. So absolutism greatly soured the relations between monarchs in Europe and their people, and made it possible for the Masons to overthrow monarchies.
Yeah. And doing the few posts on the Little King, it was eye-opening how the King Louis XVI would like, what? You don't have any bread? Don't have any grain? I gave that order yesterday for the stores to do it, and the people, the Masons in town, like, let's stop it, make him look bad, and turn the power against him.
Mm-hmm.
So they kept doing that over and over again until finally they just like had so much power over the king and all that hell broke loose.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was an effect of absolutism, because when every part of the society has its own authority to self-govern, then the authority of, let's say, the city of Soissons is not going to be used against the king, because their authority is to protect themselves. And their authority is not going to be used against their own people. But when the king tries to say, I have all power, then along comes some courtier that doesn't do what he wants, or uses his influence in the court to steal that power from himself and not for Soissons anymore, and to use it against the people. So that's why how absolutism set up the situation with it. It's easy to bring down an absolutist king. The Bourbons of Naples were brought down because Great Britain bribed the chief minister of the court, who was a Freemason, to not obey the king and not to call out the army to defend against Garibaldi's troops. That could never happen in a true subordinated Catholic monarch, because there would be powerful dukes everywhere with their own armies and troops who could come to the defense even if the king didn't know what was going on. And so the whole society acts in an organic way. So, but see, when Masons talk about the evils of monarchy, first of all, they're lying. Second of all, they're the ones that caused a lot of the evils of the monarchy and made the state become less dysfunctional so that they could overturn it. So that's why I find it kind of surprising that Gordon should write a book saying a republic is better than a monarchy. I mean, hasn't he read history?
Yeah. Let's see. Any other questions?
I think until that, I'm honored to have had this conversation with you, AJ, as a physical descendant of Hugh Capet, and I pray that all the Capetian monarchs who have made it to heaven look down and smile upon Ordo Militaris Radio and help it grow. If this kind of a program you're not going to hear anywhere else, because we're going to give you the Catholic opinion, and we're not trying to please anyone in what we say, just say the truth. So thank you for coming on for me for this show for Hugh Capet. And I myself, I look forward to being interviewed by you many other times on Ordo Militaris Radio TV. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.